The dim glow inside Buckingham Palace's jewel gallery shimmered against the polished stones. This was the chamber where the most sacred treasures of the monarchy were kept. Yet it was here that a shocking scene unfolded. King Charles entered unexpectedly. Before him stood Camilla, her trembling hands clutching the Windsor Sapphire ring, a jewel once belonging to Queen Elizabeth II, forever bound to the memory of Princess Diana. In that instant, time seemed to freeze. Charles did not simply see a jewel being taken. He saw a memory, a fragment of lost love, violated before his eyes. The ring was worth millions, yet its true power lay in its symbolism, a testament to loyalty and the sacred bond of the royal lineage. Camilla faltered, her eyes darting away as she hurriedly slipped the ring into her coat pocket. But the truth was already undeniable. The question that hung heavy in the air was this: was this nothing more than a misunderstanding, or a glimpse into Camilla's relentless thirst for power? That question shook not only Charles's heart, but also the very foundation of the monarchy's trust. To understand why this moment carried such devastating weight, we must turn back and examine the entire story of Charles and Camilla in recent years. Their love has long been seen as a stain on royal history. As Prince of Wales, Charles allowed his affair with Camilla to seep into his marriage to Diana, creating one of the most infamous scandals of the 20th century. The world never forgot the leaked tapes of secret phone calls, nor Diana's tearful interviews. Even after Camilla officially became Charles's wife, she remained in the public eye as the other woman, the enduring emblem of betrayal. When Charles ascended the throne, Camilla was crowned queen consort, yet the title never erased the stigma. To the British public, she could never rival Diana's grace, compassion, or devotion. Every step she took was scrutinized, and even within palace walls, doubt and coldness lingered. Now, with Charles facing illness and a fragile spirit, the monarchy has been left vulnerable. At the very moment he needed support, the press and public began questioning his ability to rule. Rumors of arguments and icy silences with Camilla spread, fracturing the facade of unity. And in the midst of these tensions, the reappearance of a royal treasure ignited a spark that could no longer be contained. Among the priceless jewels locked away in Buckingham Palace, the Windsor Sapphire ring has always stood apart as a symbol of both power and memory. It was part of Queen Elizabeth II's personal collection, preserved as a piece of Windsor legacy. After her passing, it was passed down to Charles as proof of succession and the duty to safeguard history. Its value left even experts in awe. Jewelers estimated at nearly £5 million, yet no figure could capture its emotional weight. Created by Gerard, the same house behind Diana's legendary engagement ring, the Windsor Sapphire was far more than an ornament. It was a bridge between past and present, between love, loss, and the burden of the crown. For Charles, the sapphire conjured the image of Diana, the late wife he could never forget. Traditionally, sapphires symbolized fidelity. Yet here it stood as a cruel reminder of a broken marriage and wounds that never healed. To him, the ring embodied both a lost love and a loyalty betrayed. And it was precisely this symbol, heavy with meaning, that became the center of a scandal shaking the monarchy. 7:30 p.m. September 14th, Buckingham Palace, usually alive with visitors, advisors, and officials, lay in an eerie silence. Pale lights flickered across the ancient stone walls. Deep within the palace, the jewel gallery, opened only on rare occasions, held a solitary figure. None other than Queen Camilla herself. "This ring was never yours." The words ricocheted off the cold stone walls, sharp and unyielding, pressing the air into something suffocating. There was no escape for Camilla. She flinched, her hand trembling, the ring nearly slipping from her grasp onto the marble floor. Stammering, she tried to justify herself. I only wanted to keep it safe." But in Charles's eyes, it was no explanation. It was nothing but a hollow excuse. Every glance, every gesture betrayed Camilla's ambition and reckless desire. From an investigative lens, this was a turning point, because what had just happened was not simply about a piece of jewelry. It was a direct challenge to Diana's memory, to the fragile trust the public still held for the monarchy. If the Windsor Sapphire ring, valued at an estimated $5 million, nearly 150 billion VND, fell into Camilla's possession, she could wield it as a symbol of legitimacy, a weapon of power. But caught in the act, her intentions were laid bare. Charles's eyes held not just fury, but pain. In that instant, two worlds collided before him, the gentle image of Diana and the harsh reality of Camilla reaching for her keepsake. That collision gave his outburst a cruelty and steel it had never carried before. Camilla tried to defend herself still, but the more she spoke, the more bitterness seeped through. Her voice quivered, layered with calculation. I am queen. I have the right to keep it. The words struck Charles like a blade. Power and ambition, those very forces had destroyed his marriage to Diana, and now they stood before him once again. The gallery was no longer a chamber of treasures. It had transformed into a silent courtroom. On one side stood Charles, king and widower, who had borne more loss than most men could endure. On the other, Camilla, embodiment of schemes that never ceased. And between them, the ring, glittering, undeniable, served as evidence. Looked at closely, this moment carried a meaning far beyond palace walls. It was a mirror reflecting the deep fractures within the royal family. Were the public to see, they would never dismiss it as a petty scandal. They would see it as proof, final and damning, that Camilla had never truly been accepted. For several seconds after his shout, Charles stood frozen. He drew in a long breath, as though clinging to reason, though his face still burned red with anger. He raised a hand, pointed directly at Camilla, each word hammering the silence. You betrayed me. You betrayed Diana. Camilla's lips quivered, but no sound came. Nothing she could say would erase the crime. The sapphire ring still gleamed on her hand, an irrefutable witness. And with that, the first crack in an uncontrollable chain of events split wide open. Charles's gaze refused to leave her hand, where the blue sapphire caught the dim yellow light of the gallery. The once grand room had become a silent battlefield. Each breath weighted and heavy. The atmosphere congealed, as though even the portraits on the walls were watching in disbelief. Then Charles's voice rose again, hoarse but seething. This ring was never yours. It was not just an accusation, but a verdict, a sentence that required no courtroom. In that moment, he was not merely a king, but a man confronting the memory of a woman who had suffered for the love that had torn them all apart. Rage erupted, and Charles stepped forward. Every restraint he had clung to for so long shattered in an instant. He looked at Camilla as though betrayal itself stood before him. To him, her secretive act of taking the ring was not mere theft of a jewel. It was the ultimate insult to Diana's memory, a blade driven deep into a wound that had never healed. That ring, bound to years of sorrow, was now tainted by the touch of his current wife, clouded by hidden motives. Camilla froze for a heartbeat, then quickly gathered her composure. Her voice trembled, yet she fought to sound steady. I only wanted to protect it. Pieces like this should not sit idle in a glass case. They belong with the one carrying the burden of the crown. But such reasoning could not cool the fury burning inside Charles. He cut her off, his words sharp, each syllable like a blade. Protect the legacy. Do not cloak your ambition with such words. This is not your legacy. This is Diana's memory. The tension burst into open confrontation. Camilla shifted from defense to attack. She accused Charles of using Diana's name as a chain to bind and wound her, claiming that for years she had been cast as the villain in the eyes of the public. In painting herself as the victim, Camilla unwittingly revealed the truth. She knew full well that anything tied to Diana was a red line for Charles, for the public, and for the monarchy itself. What unfolded inside that room was more than a quarrel between husband and wife. It mirrored a larger war, the struggle for control over the monarchy's symbolic legacy. Charles sought to preserve the sanctity of everything tied to Diana, holding it as the ultimate honor. Camilla, on the other hand, sought to redefine that legacy, to fold it into her own power and position. Two visions collided head-on, igniting a crisis too raw to conceal. Within hours, word of the confrontation leaked. No one knew where it came from, but the clash in the gallery quickly blazed across headlines and social media. The public split into two camps. One raged with fury, insisting Camilla had desecrated Diana's memory, declaring she had never been worthy of the throne. Old photos of Diana wearing the sapphire ring resurfaced everywhere, accompanied by scathing remarks aimed at Camilla. Yet another faction turned suspicion on Charles. They claimed he had seized on the incident to humiliate Camilla, especially at a time when his health was already raising concern. Had the king orchestrated the scandal to reassert his dominance, casting Camilla as the guilty party? The question sparked endless debate, leaving the monarchy cornered and defensive. Royal media experts weighed in. Once the ring appeared in scandal, it ceased being jewelry. It became a symbol, tied to Diana's suffering and the monarchy's legitimacy. Every move Camilla made would now be judged through that lens, and Charles's fury only reinforced public belief that the fracture between them was irreparable. By then, the image crisis had spun far beyond control. What began as a furtive act in a gallery had spiraled into a storm, dragging down the king's honor, the queen's standing, and the fragile stability of the crown itself. But the turmoil did not end there, for the scandal was soon brought before a private royal council meeting. And it was here that a new, more explosive chapter began. That evening, the small council chamber inside Buckingham Palace felt like a sealed box. The crystal chandelier overhead did not lend grandeur. It only deepened the suffocating weight that hung in the air. Outside, Britain was still ablaze with outrage over the Windsor Sapphire ring. Inside, four key figures of the monarchy faced one another. Charles at the center, shoulders heavy, Camilla at his side, her face stiff, caught between defense and defiance. Across from them sat William, Princess Anne, and Catherine, three pairs of eyes, three separate souls, yet bound by the same cold judgment. There were no formalities, no polite courtesies. William was the first to break the silence, his voice cutting, edged with fury. My mother wore those stones as symbols of love and loyalty. And what did you do? You slipped it into your coat like a common thief. Each word landed like a blade, dragging back the painful memory of Princess Diana, the mother whose tragic death left wounds that never closed. His accusation was not only against Camilla, it was a cry for a nation that once adored Diana with unshakable devotion. Camilla's hands tightened, her eyes flashing with strained resolve. She fought to keep her tone steady. I only wanted to protect the legacy. Such jewels cannot be left out for public dissection. But her defense rang hollow, undone by the very secrecy of her act that had shattered what little trust remained. William's voice lashed back. Protect it? By hiding it for yourself? The people of Britain are not fools, and I am no child to be led astray. As the tension sharpened, Princess Anne spoke. There was no metaphor, no hesitation. Her voice was blunt and unyielding, like a hammer striking. Camilla, you were never accepted by the public, and you never will be. Your hand on that ring proves what I have always believed. Your ambition knows no bounds. Do not speak of legacy. Diana is the legacy. You are the crack in this history. The words shook the chamber. Anne, long known for her candor, now embodied the anger sweeping across the nation. Cornered, Camilla began to lose control. Her voice rose, shifting to blame. I have endured enough of the public's contempt, enough of the whispers behind my back. None of you ever gave me a chance. That ring, I only wanted to keep it from being used as a weapon against us. Yet her protest only exposed her desperation. William cut her down, his voice near a roar. No, you wanted it for yourself, just as you always wanted to keep father from my mother. Throughout the storm, Catherine remained silent. She spoke no word, but her icy gaze fixed on Camilla like a blade. That silence carried more weight than any accusation. For Catherine, pure in the public eye, commanded respect beyond measure. Her mere presence, her cold disdain, was the heaviest verdict of all. Later, observers would note that it was Catherine's silence that sealed Camilla's guilt in the minds of millions. At the center, Charles trembled, his hand gripping the arm of his chair. Every word from William was salt in an old wound. Every line from Anne a hammer's blow. Every silence from Catherine a mirror of bitter truth. He knew this was not only a family reckoning, but the echo of a nation outside. To defend Camilla meant to defy Britain itself. To forsake her meant to dismantle the bond he had clung to for decades. The meeting dragged on under a suffocating weight. The accusations, the burning stares, turned the chamber into a hidden courtroom. Camilla stood like a defendant desperate for escape. Charles, in contrast, seemed a king forced into an impossible choice: shield his private love, or honor Diana's memory and the people's will. By the time the clock struck 10, the council dissolved into a heavy silence. No one spoke a final word, yet the verdict was written across their faces. William's eyes blazed with fury. Anne's iron resolve was unshaken. Catherine's ruthless silence lingered like judgment itself, and Charles sat torn, consumed by inner torment. The ring had long since ceased to be a piece of jewelry. It had become the emblem of a deeper war within the monarchy, past versus present, Diana's memory versus Camilla's ambition, the people's loyalty versus the court's power. Within the cold stone walls of Buckingham, Charles remained a prisoner to sleepless nights. He sat alone by the window. London's darkness stretched like a suffocating veil. From distant halls echoed the whispers of the palace. Yet in his mind only the roar of the people remained, sharp and merciless as knives. For all his years balancing love and duty, he now stood trapped at the edge of an unyielding choice. Charles knew to keep Camilla was to protect the love of half a century. She was not merely a wife, but the only anchor he had after years of living in the monarchy's shadow. Yet on the other side stood Diana's memory, an invisible judgment. Every time her name was spoken, it was not just a woman they recalled, but a symbol, a victim of a broken marriage in which Charles himself was forever the accused. In his moments of exhaustion, Charles often sought refuge in old memories. The image of Diana in her pure white gown returned to him with painful clarity. He remembered the day he held out the glittering Gerard blue sapphire ring, offering it to the young girl before millions of eyes. For many, that moment symbolized happiness and hope. For Charles today, it was a wound that never healed, proof of a broken marriage he could never escape. The more he thought of the Gerard ring, the more he felt the chasm between the two paths before him. On one side, Diana, the eternal symbol of the people. On the other, Camilla, the private truth of his heart. The more he thought, the more he was torn apart by one merciless question. Could he continue to keep Camilla, when her very presence made the public feel Diana's memory was betrayed once more? Or must he coldly sacrifice Camilla to preserve the honor of the crown and soothe the soul of the woman mourned by the world? This was not just a personal dilemma. It was a political battle, a symbolic struggle. To the public, Charles was no longer an ordinary man. He was the King of England, the embodiment of the monarchy. And in that role, he could not act for love alone. He had to act for legacy, for the image of the institution, and for the memory of a princess lost. Close advisors urged him to end the controversy swiftly. His family, from William to Anne, looked at him with eyes demanding a decisive choice. The public fanned the flames, forcing him toward a resolution. To keep Camilla meant risking a crisis of trust. To sacrifice her meant cutting away half a lifetime of devotion and the only love he had ever stood firm for. On nights when Charles wandered the empty corridors, his footsteps echoed like hammer strikes against the verdict in his soul. No one else could decide for him. No advisor, no royal relative could shoulder this burden. For this was not only the choice of a king, but of a man trapped between two worlds. And then, in the darkest hour, when Diana's memory and Camilla's gaze both haunted his mind, The king knew he had no escape. He must choose, a choice no one could have foreseen. The light in the council chamber dimmed to gold, casting long shadows against Buckingham's thick walls. The heavy air stifled every sound until only a suffocating silence remained, so deep one could almost hear the heartbeat of each person seated within. All eyes fixed on the king. Charles sat there, face tense, eyes hollow as if wrestling with himself. Then, like a blade slicing through the silence, his voice broke forth. "You must leave this palace." The words rang out clear, firm, unyielding. His voice was hoarse but carried the weight of judgment, as though a verdict had been passed in a secret court. Camilla froze. Her hand trembled, clinging to the chair's armrest as if for support. But the shock was too great. Never had she imagined that the man who once defied the world to protect her would now turn his back and order her banished from the very place that symbolized supreme power. Yet it did not end there. Charles fixed his eyes on Camilla, his gaze cold enough to pierce through every excuse. He uttered the words that would haunt royal history for years to come. "You can never replace Diana." The room exploded in that instant. His words were not merely rejection. They were the gravest indictment. Diana, the woman Camilla had once lingered in the shadow of, was invoked once more, this time as an untouchable symbol, a sacred memory Charles vowed to defend at all costs. No one else in the room spoke. William lowered his head, but his lips tightened, as if confirming that justice had finally been done for his mother. Princess Anne folded her arms, her face like ice, her eyes sharp as steel. Catherine remained silent, but her silence carried the weight of judgment, colder and more decisive than any words. For Camilla, that moment was nothing short of a plunge from the heights into an abyss. From queen, the title she had long coveted and claimed, she now fell, undone in a single sentence. Years of calculation, every step she had taken toward the throne, all turned to ash, swept away in an instant. For Charles, this was not merely a personal decision. It was a political move. He knew that keeping Camilla meant sacrificing the monarchy's image before the public, but by casting her aside, he could salvage what dignity remained and, more importantly, protect the memory of Diana, the woman who, though gone, still lived forever in the people's hearts. A verdict had been delivered. That judgment not only ended a marriage, but also opened a storm-laden chapter for the monarchy. And then saw, as if fate itself demanded it, Camilla's response would not be long in coming. The chamber echoed with furious screams. Camilla, who for decades had carried herself before the public with a facade of calm, could no longer hold the mask. She slammed the heavy palace doors, her voice hoarse but seething with rage. "You are the true betrayer. You betrayed me. You betrayed this love." Her words were not aimed at Charles alone. They reverberated like a challenge against the ancient walls of Buckingham itself. Her eyes burned red, her trembling hands refusing to relent as she hurled anything within reach, turning her fury into a violent spectacle. In that instant, she was no longer the queen cloaked in power, but a desperate woman staggering on the edge of collapse. Servants scrambled to retreat, none daring to come close, for every glance from her cut the air like a blade. Yet when she faced the press, Camilla slipped on another mask. No longer screaming, she spoke slowly with venom in every syllable, each word like a dagger. "I gave up everything to stand by his side, and now he spins a story to smear me. Who, then, is the real deceiver?" Her statement ignited headlines across the tabloids, sending shockwaves through the public. Some saw Camilla as the embodiment of ruthless ambition, willing to touch even the most sacred relics to tighten her grip on power. Others questioned whether Charles himself was exploiting the scandal to destroy the woman who had stood beside him for decades. But whichever side one took, the monarchy's image was once again drowned beneath the weight of this bitter clash. At the center of it all lay the Windsor Sapphire ring, once treasured as a jewel embedded deep in the heart of the royal family. No longer just a dazzling blue stone, no longer merely an heirloom of Queen Elizabeth II, it had taken on a new meaning, a symbol of delayed justice for Princess Diana. And that justice had not been declared by any court, but by Charles's cold, unyielding decree expelling Camilla from the palace. Yet his decision brought no liberation. Instead, it opened a darker, heavier chapter. He now faced crushing pressure from both within the palace walls and from the world outside. He was not only the king, but also a man ensnared between a love long gone and the indelible memory of the wife the world still mourned. Every gaze turned toward him. Was this the right move? Or merely a desperate attempt to patch together a fractured legacy? The question lingers still. Is this the end of Camilla, the closing chapter to decades of controversy? Or is it, in truth, only the beginning of a new royal tragedy, one capable of shaking the very throne? What do you think of this dramatic turn? Share your thoughts in the comments, pass this video along, and don't forget to subscribe so we can continue uncovering the hidden truths behind the velvet curtain of the monarchy.